The crack of a rifle shot split the calm spring morning of 1873, as Josephine Daniels regained consciousness just long enough to feel rough hands lifting her onto a wooden platform. Her head throbbed from where she'd been struck, the taste of blood metallic on her lips, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her again was the hungry eyes of men lining up with money in their hands. She was being sold to the highest bidder, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. Preston Macintyre had ridden into Truckee, Nevada that morning with no intention of buying anything more than supplies and perhaps a hot meal. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy had been driving cattle north from Sacramento and had stopped in the bustling railroad town to rest before continuing his journey. With his dark brown hat pulled low over his eyes and a week's worth of stubble on his jaw, he blended in with the other rough men who populated the western town. The auction hadn't been advertised, but word spread quickly among the saloons and boarding houses that something special was on offer behind Hargrove's general store. Preston had ignored the whispers until he caught the words "unconscious woman" and "pretty as a picture." A cold fury had settled in his gut as he changed direction, pushing through the crowd of men who had gathered in a loose semicircle. $500. A red-faced man in a bowler hat shouted, waving a stack of bills. $600, countered another. Preston's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. A young woman with copper-colored hair lay slumped on the makeshift platform, a trickle of blood running down her temple. Her fine dress was torn at the shoulder, and her hands were bound with coarse rope. Behind her stood a man Preston recognized as Johnny Webb, a notorious slave trader who operated outside the law. "What I've got here, gentlemen," Webb announced with a yellow-toothed grin, "is a fine specimen. Educated, too, from back east, caught her trying to escape her rightful owner. He's paid me handsomely to find her a new master who'll keep her in line." Preston knew it was a lie. Slavery had been abolished a decade ago with the Emancipation Proclamation, and even if this woman had been an indentured servant, this sale was illegal by any measure. His hand drifted to the Colt revolver at his hip as he assessed the situation. $800, called out a man wearing a gold watch chain. $900, shouted another. Preston stepped forward. $1,000, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. Webb's eyebrows rose. "Well now, looks like we have a serious buyer. Do I hear 1,100, the crowd murmured, but no one countered Preston's bid. Most of the men there didn't have that kind of money, 1,000 going once. Webb began. Preston's eyes never left the unconscious woman. Something about her stirred a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years, 1,000 going twice. A heavy-set man in the back called out, 1,100. Preston turned, memorizing the man's face before saying, 1,500. Webb's eyes widened. $1,500 for this fine lady. Going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the brown hat. Preston stepped forward, counting out bills from a leather pouch. He'd been planning to use the money to expand his small ranch outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming, but some things were more important than land. "Get these ropes off her," he demanded as he handed over the money. Webb shrugged. "She's yours now, mister. Do whatever you please." With a glare that made Webb take a step back, Preston cut the ropes with his knife, then gently lifted the woman into his arms. Her head lolled against his chest, and he could feel her shallow breathing. Relief flooded through him, at least she was alive. "If anyone follows me," Preston announced to the crowd, "they'll wish they hadn't." No one doubted his sincerity. Preston carried the woman to his horse, a sturdy palomino named Thunder, and carefully mounted with her cradled against him. As he rode away from Truckee, he knew his journey had just become infinitely more complicated, but he couldn't have left her to such a fate. Not when he had the means to save her. Josephine floated in and out of consciousness, aware of the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the solid warmth of arms around her. Pain throbbed at her temple, and memories flashed in disjointed fragments the stagecoach attack outside of Truckee, the men who had killed the driver and the other passengers, the blow to her head when she tried to run. When she finally opened her eyes fully, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She was lying on a bedroll beside a small campfire, a folded jacket serving as her pillow. Panic seized her, and she tried to sit up too quickly, sending fresh waves of pain through her skull. "Easy now," a deep voice cautioned. "You've got a nasty wound that needs time to heal." Josephine turned toward the voice, her vision swimming before focusing on the man sitting across the fire. He was watching her with concerned blue eyes, his expression unreadable. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice rasping from disuse. "Where am I?" "Name's Preston Macintyre," he replied, pouring water from a canteen into a tin cup. "We're about 15 miles east of Truckee, heading toward the Sierra Nevada Pass." He offered her the cup, but she didn't take it, eyeing him with suspicion. "I'm not going to hurt you, miss," he said softly. "I paid $1,500 to get you away from those men who were auctioning you off." The memory hit her like a physical blow. "They were selling me," she whispered, horror creeping through her veins. Preston nodded grimly. "Like you were cattle. I couldn't let that happen." Josephine's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, refusing to show weakness. "So what do you expect in return, Mr. Macintyre?" "I should warn you, I have no money and no family to pay a ransom." A flicker of hurt crossed his features before his expression settled back into careful neutrality. "I expect nothing, Miss Daniels, Josephine Daniels, Miss Daniels. I'll take you to the nearest town with a proper law office, or wherever else you'd like to go. Once you're well enough to travel on your own, of course." Josephine studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. In her 22 years, she had learned that men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. "Why would you spend so much money to help a stranger?" she asked. Preston poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. "My mother was taken by men like that when I was a boy. No one helped her." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Josephine could hear the old pain beneath his words. "I couldn't stand by and let it happen again." The simple honesty in his answer made her reach for the cup of water he had offered. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and she was surprised by the gentleness in his calloused hand. "Thank you," she said softly, taking a sip. "Not just for the water." He nodded once, then turned his attention to the rabbit roasting over the fire. "You should eat something if you can. We've got a long journey ahead." "Where are we going?" she asked, realizing she had no destination in mind. The teaching position she had been traveling to in San Francisco was likely filled by now, and she had no desire to return to Boston where painful memories awaited. "I was heading to my ranch near Cheyenne before all this," Preston explained, "but we can go wherever you need." Josephine considered her options, which were painfully few. "I don't know where to go," she admitted. "Everything I owned was in my trunk on the stagecoach." Preston handed her a plate with tender pieces of rabbit meat and some hardtack. "We can try to recover your belongings tomorrow. Raiders usually take the valuables and leave the rest." "That's very kind, but it's no trouble," he interrupted. "Eat now. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." As night fell completely, Preston spread his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire, giving her space while staying close enough to protect her if needed. Josephine watched him through the flames, this mysterious cowboy who had spent a small fortune to save her life. Despite her lingering wariness, she felt safer than she had in months. "Mr. Macintyre," she called softly. He looked up, his face half in shadow. "Yes, Miss Daniels. Thank you for carrying me to safety." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Get some rest, Miss Daniels. Dawn comes early out here." As Josephine drifted off to sleep, the steady sound of Preston's breathing across the fire became a strange comfort in the wilderness that surrounded them. Morning brought clarity and with it, pain. Josephine's head throbbed as she sat up, and her body ached from the attack and spending a night on the ground. But the clear mountain air filled her lungs, and the sight of Preston preparing coffee over a fresh fire gave her an odd sense of security. "How are you feeling?" he asked, handing her a steaming cup. "Like I've been trampled by horses," she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But alive, thanks to you." Preston nodded, then turned to his saddlebag, retrieving a small tin. "I've got some willow bark powder. It helps with pain." As he mixed the bitter medicine into a second cup of water for her, Josephine took the opportunity to really look at her rescuer in the morning light. He was older than she had first thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. His brown hair curled slightly where it touched his collar, and though his clothes were dusty from the trail, they were of good quality. "What's your story, Mr. Macintyre?" she asked, taking the medicine with a grimace at the taste. "How does a cowboy come to have $1,500 to spend on rescuing strange women?" A hint of amusement crossed his face. "I'm not just a cowboy, Miss Daniels. I own a cattle ranch, small but growing." He packed up their meager camp as he spoke. "I was in California selling a herd and was passing through Truckee on my way back to Wyoming." "Lucky coincidence for me," she murmured. "Providence, perhaps," he suggested, offering her a hand to help her stand. Their journey to the site of the stagecoach attack was somber. 3 fresh graves marked where the driver and 2 male passengers had been hastily buried, likely by whoever had discovered the scene after the raiders left. Josephine said a silent prayer for them, feeling a fresh wave of guilt that she had survived when they hadn't. "Don't," Preston said quietly, reading her expression. "Survivor's guilt won't bring them back." Her trunk had been ransacked but was still there, the lock broken and contents scattered. Her money and jewelry were gone, as expected, but her clothes and books remained, along with a small silver locket containing a picture of her parents. Preston helped her gather what could be salvaged, securing her belongings to his horse. "What were you doing on that stagecoach?" he asked as they prepared to leave. Josephine fingered the locket, drawing strength from the familiar weight of it around her neck. "I was going to San Francisco to take a position as a schoolteacher. My parents died last winter, influenza, and there was nothing left for me in Boston." Preston's expression softened. "I'm sorry about your parents. Thank you, they were good people." She hesitated. "What about you? Do you have family waiting in Wyoming?" He shook his head. "Just me and about 200 head of cattle and some good hands who work for me." As they mounted Thunder, Josephine sitting behind Preston, her arms tentatively circling his waist, she made a decision. "Mr. Macintyre, I'd like to accompany you to Cheyenne if the offer still stands, at least until I figure out my next steps." She felt him stiffen slightly in surprise, then relax. "The offer stands, Miss Daniels, but it's a long, hard journey." "I'm stronger than I look," she assured him, "and I can earn my keep. I can cook, and I'm good with numbers if you need help with your accounts." Preston chuckled, a warm, rich sound that she felt through his back. "I'll hold you to that. My account books are a mess." As they rode away from the site of so much tragedy, Josephine found herself looking forward rather than back. Whatever the future held, she was grateful for the chance to find out. The journey to Wyoming was arduous, but not without its moments of beauty. They traveled through the rugged Sierra Nevada mountains, across the vast expanses of Nevada's high desert, and into the rolling hills of Utah Territory. Throughout it all, Preston proved to be a capable guide and an unexpected companion. He was quiet by nature, but opened up more with each passing day, sharing stories of his life on the ranch and listening to Josephine's tales of growing up in Boston with genuine interest. At night, they would make camp, and Preston always maintained a respectful distance, setting up his bedroll across the fire from hers. But Josephine found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders as he chopped wood for their fire, the graceful way he handled his horse, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face. "Have you always wanted to be a teacher?" he asked one evening as they sat beside a creek in eastern Utah. The spring weather was mild, and they had stopped early to let thunder rest and to wash their clothes. Josephine smiled, running a brush through her damp hair. "Not always. As a girl, I wanted to be an explorer like Lewis and Clark. I devoured books about the West. And yet you seem a bit lost out here in the real thing," he observed without judgment. "Books don't prepare you for the smell," she replied with a laugh. "Or the endless hours in a saddle," Preston grinned. "You're adapting well for an Eastern lady." "I'm not sure I qualify as a lady anymore," she said, gesturing to her practical riding clothes. She had abandoned her torn dress days ago in favor of a pair of trousers and a shirt that Preston had purchased for her in the last town they'd passed through. The shopkeeper's wife had looked scandalized, but Josephine found she didn't care. Out here, practicality trumped propriety. "Being a lady isn't about clothes," Preston said thoughtfully. "It's about character, and yours is impressive, Miss Daniels." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you, Mr. Macintyre, and please, after all we've been through, I think you could call me Josephine." He looked up, those blue eyes catching the golden light of sunset. "Only if you'll call me Preston." "Preston," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Something shifted between them in that moment, a lowering of barriers, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed through shared hardship and growing respect. The next day, as they crossed into Wyoming territory, a spring storm descended upon them without warning. The rain came down in icy sheets, and lightning split the sky with jagged fury. Preston spotted an abandoned line shack, just as the worst of the deluge hit, and they made a dash for shelter, leading thunder to the attached lean-to. Inside, the shack was dusty but sound, with a small stone fireplace and a single narrow bed frame with a straw-filled mattress. Preston quickly got a fire going while Josephine wrung out their soaked blankets and laid them near the flames to dry. "You're shivering," he noted with concern. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her teeth were chattering. Preston rummaged through his saddlebags and produced a flask. "Whiskey. It'll warm you from the inside." Josephine hesitated, then took a small sip, coughing as the liquor burned a path down her throat. "That's horrible," she gasped. Preston laughed, the sound filling the small space. "It's not meant for sipping at fancy parties." "Clearly," she agreed, but took another sip anyway, welcoming the spreading warmth. As the storm raged outside, they sat close to the fire, sharing the flask and stories from their lives. Preston told her about building his ranch from nothing after returning from the war, where he'd served in the Union cavalry. Josephine shared memories of her childhood in Boston, her father's bookshop, and her mother's garden. "I miss them every day," she admitted, the whiskey loosening her tongue. "But being out here, seeing all this." She gestured vaguely at the world beyond the shack's walls. "I think they would be happy for me. They always wanted me to live fully." "Are you," Preston asked softly, "living fully?" Josephine considered the question, looking at the man beside her, this strong, honorable cowboy who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. "I'm starting to," she answered truthfully. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Josephine thought he might kiss her. Instead, Preston cleared his throat and stood up. "You should take the bed," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'll sleep by the fire." "Don't be ridiculous," she protested. "We can share it. The mattress is wide enough and we're both adults." Preston's expression was unreadable in the flickering firelight. "That wouldn't be proper." "Proper," Josephine laughed, a touch of the whiskey's boldness in her voice. "We've been traveling alone together for weeks. I think we've left proper far behind us." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "All the more reason to maintain some boundaries, Josephine." She stood facing him. "Is it because you don't find me attractive?" "Because if so, that's not it," he interrupted, his voice strained. "Quite the opposite, in fact." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. "Then why?" she whispered. Preston ran a hand through his hair, his internal struggle evident. "Because you're vulnerable right now. You've been through hell and I won't take advantage of that." His consideration only made her want him more. "I'm not asking you to take advantage, Preston. I'm asking you to hold me through this storm. Nothing more." After a long moment, he nodded. They lay down on the narrow bed, Preston's arm tentatively wrapping around her waist as she nestled against his chest. The steady beat of his heart beneath her ear was the most comforting sound Josephine had ever heard. "Thank you," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. Warm and safe in his embrace, Preston's response was so quiet she almost missed it. "I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." As the storm raged through the night, they slept peacefully in each other's arms, something new and fragile blossoming between them. The ranch came into view on a clear afternoon in early June, after nearly a month of traveling. Nestled in a valley with rolling hills to the west, and a creek cutting through the eastern pastures, the rocking M was everything Preston had described and more. A two-story log house stood proudly at the center, with a large barn, bunkhouse, and several corrals surrounding it. Cattle dotted the green pastures, and a small garden plot showed signs of recent planting. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed, taking in the sight of what Preston had built with his own hands. "It's home," he replied simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. As they rode into the yard, a weathered man with a silver-streaked beard emerged from the barn, followed by a gangly young cowhand. "Boss, thought you'd be back weeks ago," the older man called, then stopped short when he noticed Josephine. "Well now, what have we here?" "Charlie, this is Miss Josephine Daniels." Preston introduced her as he dismounted, then helped her down. "Josephine, this is Charlie Watson, my foreman, and the youngster there is Teddy Miller." "Madam," both men said, tipping their hats respectfully, though their curious gazes bounced between her and Preston. "Miss Daniels will be staying with us for a while," Preston explained, his tone brooking no questions. "How have things been running?" As Charlie updated Preston on ranch operations, young Teddy offered to take Josephine's trunk to the house. She followed him up the porch steps, curious to see Preston's home. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace and sturdy, handcrafted furniture. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that surprised Josephine with their variety from practical farming guides to classic literature. A piano stood in one corner, its surface dusty from disuse. "You play?" Preston asked, coming in behind her. "I do," she replied, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "My mother insisted on lessons. It hasn't been touched since I bought it at an estate sale last year," he admitted. "I thought it might make the place seem more like a home and less like a bunkhouse." Josephine smiled at the image of this rugged cowboy purchasing a piano for his empty house. "I'd be happy to play for you sometime." "I'd like that," he said, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared understanding. Then he cleared his throat. Let me show you to your room." The bedroom at the top of the stairs was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large bed, a wardrobe, and a washstand. Windows on 2 walls offered views of both the front yard and the western pastures. "It's perfect," Josephine said, genuinely pleased. Preston shifted awkwardly in the doorway. "I'll have Rosa bring up some hot water. She's our cook, comes up from the Mexican settlement 3 days a week. You'll like her." "Thank you, Preston, for everything," he nodded once, then hesitated. "Josephine, I want you to know that you can stay as long as you need. No expectations, no pressure." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache with a sweetness she hadn't expected. "I appreciate that, but I'd still like to earn my keep, as we discussed." A smile tugged at his lips. "Those account books aren't going to organize themselves." After he left, Josephine stood at the window, watching him cross the yard to the barn. In the weeks since he'd carried her away from that auction platform, he had become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. What had started as gratitude had deepened into respect, friendship, and now something more that she wasn't quite ready to name. Life at the Rockingham fell into a comfortable routine. Josephine spent mornings organizing Preston's chaotic business records, afternoons helping Rosa in the kitchen or tending to the garden, and evenings reading by the fire or playing the piano while Preston listened from his favorite chair. She wrote to the school board in San Francisco, explaining her situation and inquiring if the position might still be open, but found herself hoping it wasn't. Preston, for his part, went about his ranch duties with renewed vigor, often working from sunrise to sunset. But he always made time to join Josephine for meals and evening conversations. The careful distance he had maintained on the trail had relaxed somewhat, though he still treated her with unfailing respect. One evening in late June, as Josephine played a melancholy Chopin nocturne on the piano, she felt Preston's presence behind her. She finished the piece, letting the final notes hang in the air. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Sad but beautiful." She turned on the bench to face him. "It reminds me of my mother. She loved Chopin." Preston sat down beside her, the piano bench just wide enough for two. "You miss your old life?" It wasn't a question, but Josephine answered anyway. "Parts of it, but I'm finding that I like this life too." She gestured around the cozy room at the home he had created. "There's an honesty to it that I appreciate. Even with all the mud and manure," he asked with a half smile. Josephine laughed. "Even with those, although I could do without Charlie's snoring from the bunkhouse." "How do your cowhands sleep through that?" "Years of practice," Preston chuckled. Then, more seriously, "I got a letter today from the sheriff in Truckee. They caught Webb and his gang trying the same auction scheme in Carson City." Josephine's hands tightened on the piano keys, producing a discordant sound. "Will there be a trial?" Preston nodded. "They're asking if you'd be willing to testify." The thought of facing her captors again made her stomach clench, but Josephine straightened her shoulders. "Of course I will. Those men need to be brought to justice." "I'd go with you," Preston offered immediately. "If you want." The relief that flooded through her was overwhelming. "I'd like that very much." Their eyes met, and Josephine saw something in Preston's gaze that made her breath catch a tenderness that went beyond friendship or duty. "Josephine," he began, his voice low. These past weeks, a loud knock at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Preston sighed and stood, crossing the room to answer it. Charlie stood on the porch, his expression grim. "Sorry to disturb you, boss, but Johnson's riding in from town with news. Looks like Blackwood's men are rustling cattle from the north pasture again." Preston's face hardened. "Get the men ready. We'll ride out at first light." After Charlie left, Preston turned back to Josephine, the intimate moment broken. "I'm sorry." James Blackwood owns the neighboring ranch. He's been trying to force me out since I bought this place. By stealing your cattle?" Josephine asked, indignant on his behalf. "Among other things," Preston confirmed. "Cut fences, poisoned water holes, threatened my hands. The local law won't touch him because he's got money and connections." "That's outrageous," Josephine exclaimed. "There must be something that can be done." Preston's smile was tight. "I'm open to suggestions, schoolteacher." The use of her profession rather than her name stung, though she knew he didn't mean it unkindly. It was simply a reminder of the life that waited for her beyond the rocking M. "I should get some rest," she said, suddenly weary. "If you're riding out early." Preston nodded, and she could see the regret in his eyes for the moment that had slipped away. "Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Preston." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Josephine wondered what he had been about to say before Charlie's interruption, and why the thought of returning to teaching now felt like settling for less than she truly wanted. Dawn found Josephine in the kitchen, preparing food for the men to take with them on their pursuit of the rustlers. Rosa wouldn't arrive until later, and Josephine wanted to do something useful. Preston entered quietly, already dressed in his riding clothes with his gun belt strapped to his waist. He looked surprised to see her up so early. "You didn't have to do this," he said, gesturing to the wrapped packages of food on the table. "I wanted to help," she replied simply. "How long will you be gone? A day, maybe two." He poured himself a cup of coffee. "Depends on how far they've taken the cattle." Josephine nodded, trying to hide her concern. "Be careful. Blackwood's men sound dangerous." Preston's expression softened. "I've dealt with worse." "That doesn't make me worry any less," she admitted. He set down his coffee and closed the distance between them. "Josephine," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "If I don't come back, don't," she interrupted, pressing her fingers to his lips. "Don't say it." Preston caught her hand, holding it against his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "I need to say it. If something happens to me, everything here is yours. I've already had papers drawn up." Shock rendered her momentarily speechless. "Preston, I can't accept that." "Your ranch should go to your family, or you are the closest thing to family I have," he said simply. "And you're the only person I trust to care for this place the way I would." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "Nothing's going to happen to you." Preston smiled slightly. "Probably not. But a man in my position needs to be prepared." The sound of horses outside signaled that the others were ready to leave. Preston stepped back, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Promise me you'll be careful," Josephine insisted. "I promise," he said. Then, with a courage that seemed to surprise even him, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Wait for me." The question contained multitudes, and Josephine understood its true meaning. "Always," she whispered. Preston rode out with Charlie and 5 other men, leaving Teddy behind to watch over the ranch and Josephine. The day stretched endlessly before her, and she filled it with work helping Rosa clean the house, going through more of Preston's business ledgers, playing the piano to soothe her nerves. That night, she couldn't sleep. The house felt too empty without Preston's presence downstairs, and worry gnawed at her. She had lost everyone she loved to illness. The thought of losing Preston to violence was unbearable. It was then, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, that Josephine finally acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She was in love with Preston Macintyre. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it brought a strange calm. Whatever happened next, whatever choices lay before her, this feeling was real and true. Morning came with no news, and Josephine went about her day with forced cheerfulness, not wanting to worry Rosa or Teddy. She was in the garden, weeding the vegetable patch, when the sound of approaching horses made her look up with hope. But it wasn't Preston and his men returning. 3 riders she didn't recognize approached the house, their manner purposeful and threatening. Teddy came running from the barn, shotgun in hand. "Miss Daniels," he called, "get inside and lock the door." Josephine didn't argue, recognizing the danger in the stranger's demeanor. From the window, she watched as Teddy confronted the men, his young face set in determined lines. "This is Rockingham property," he declared. "State your business." The leader of the trio, a man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes, sneered down at him. "Our business is with Macintyre." "Where is he?" "Not here," Teddy replied firmly. "And you're trespassing." The man's laugh was ugly. "Blackwood sent us with a message. Either Macintyre sells to him, or there won't be a ranch left to sell. You can tell Blackwood that Mr. Macintyre isn't interested in selling," Josephine called, stepping onto the porch despite her fear. She couldn't let young Teddy face these thugs alone. The leader's gaze shifted to her, and a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Well, well, what have we here? Macintyre's been holding out on us." "Leave now," Josephine ordered, her voice steadier than her nerves, "before Mr. Macintyre returns with the sheriff." "The sheriff?" The man laughed again. "Honey, the sheriff's in Blackwood's pocket. Nobody's coming to help you." As if to punctuate his words, a column of black smoke rose from the direction of the north pasture. One of the other riders had slipped away unnoticed and set fire to the dry grass. "The cattle!" Teddy exclaimed in horror. "That's just the beginning," the leader promised. "Tell Macintyre he has 1 week to accept Blackwood's offer. Next time it won't just be grass burning." With that, they rode off, leaving Josephine and Teddy to deal with the fire. Together with Rosa, they spent hours battling the flames, saving most of the cattle but losing a significant portion of the summer grazing land. Exhausted and smoke-stained, Josephine was checking on the remaining cattle when she heard the sound of approaching riders. This time, it was Preston and his men driving about 20 head of recovered cattle before them. Preston's expression shifted from triumph to concern as he took in the blackened pasture and Josephine's disheveled appearance. He dismounted quickly, crossing to her in long strides. "What happened?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Josephine explained about Blackwood's men and their threats, watching as Preston's face darkened with each word. "This has gone far enough," he said when she finished. "Charlie, take the men and make sure all the cattle are accounted for. I'm going to have a word with James Blackwood." "No," Josephine grabbed his arm. "That's what he wants, to provoke you into doing something rash." Preston looked down at her, his anger tempered by her concern. "I can't let him threaten my people, Josephine. I won't let him threaten you." "Then we'll fight him, but we'll do it smart," she insisted. "Not with guns, but with the law." "The law around here is bought and paid for," Preston reminded her. "Then we'll go over the local law, to the territorial governor if necessary." Josephine's mind was already working on a solution. "Do you have proof of Blackwood's misdeeds? Witnesses who would testify?" Preston's expression shifted from anger to thoughtful consideration. "I've kept records of every incident, and some of his former hands might talk if they were protected from retaliation." "Then that's our starting point," Josephine said firmly. "Violence only begets more violence, Preston. There's a better way." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, school teacher, we'll try it your way." The relief that flooded through her was palpable. "Thank you." Preston's hand came up to touch her cheek, his thumb wiping away a smudge of soot. "You saved my ranch today, and possibly my life." "We saved it together," she corrected softly. "That's what partners do." The word hung between them, filled with promise and possibility. Preston's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a moment, Josephine thought he might kiss her properly this time. Instead, he took a step back, his hand falling away. "You should get cleaned up," he said, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. We've got work to do if we're going to take on James Blackwood. Josephine nodded, understanding his reluctance to act on the feelings growing between them while danger still lurked. There would be time for that later after they had secured the future of the Rockingham. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Preston and Josephine compiled evidence of Blackwood's crimes, from cattle rustling to intimidation of neighboring ranchers. Charlie knew a lawyer in Cheyenne who wasn't afraid of Blackwood's influence, and Preston sent him with the documentation they had gathered. Meanwhile, Blackwood's men continued their campaign of harassment, but Preston had organized round-the-clock patrols of the ranch boundaries. Josephine insisted on taking her turn standing watch, much to Preston's initial objection. "I know how to shoot," she informed him, demonstrating her proficiency with his Winchester rifle by putting 5 bullets into a fence post at 50 yards. "My father believed every woman should know how to defend herself." Preston's eyebrows had risen in surprise, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he paired her with Charlie for the early morning watch, when Blackwood's men were least likely to cause trouble. It was during one such watch, as dawn painted the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold, that Josephine truly understood why Preston loved this land so fiercely. The rolling hills, the crystal-clear creek, the distant mountains, all of it held a wild beauty that stirred something deep within her soul. "It gets under your skin, doesn't it?" Charlie commented, noting her expression as they rode the perimeter. "It does," she agreed. "I never understood the appeal of all this open space before. In Boston, everything is so contained, so defined. And here the only limits are the ones you set for yourself," Charlie finished with a nod. "That's why the boss fought so hard for this place. It's not just land to him, it's freedom." Josephine smiled, thinking of Preston's fierce independence and equally fierce loyalty to those under his protection. "He's a good man. The best I've known," Charlie confirmed. "And he looks at you the way a man looks at his future, Miss Daniels." The observation made her blush, but she didn't deny it. "We haven't discussed the future," Charlie chuckled. "Some things don't need discussing to be true." When they returned to the ranch house, Preston was waiting on the porch with a telegram in his hand and a grim expression on his face. "What's wrong?" Josephine asked, dismounting quickly. "The trial in Nevada has been set for next month," he explained. "We're required to testify against Webb and his accomplices." "That's good news, isn't it?" she asked, confused by his dark mood. Preston handed her the telegram. "Read the rest." Josephine's eyes scanned the paper, her stomach sinking as she read that Webb had escaped custody and was believed to be heading east, possibly toward Wyoming. "He knows I'm here," she whispered. Preston nodded. "I've wired the sheriff in Cheyenne. He'll send deputies to patrol the area." But with Blackwood's threats and now this. Josephine looked up at Preston, seeing the concern etched in his features. "You're in danger because of me." "No," he said firmly, taking her hands in his. "I was in Blackwood's sights long before you arrived. As for Webb, he's a coward who preys on the vulnerable. He won't expect you to be protected and armed." Josephine squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his confidence. "So what do? We continue with our plan against Blackwood, and we stay vigilant against Webb," Preston answered. "And we don't let fear rule our lives." His steady resolve calmed her racing heart. "Together," she agreed. Preston's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Together." The word seemed to be taking on new meaning each time they spoke it. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Preston turned to Josephine with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about what happens after all this is resolved." Her heart stuttered. "Oh. You mentioned teaching in San Francisco," he continued, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Is that still what you want?" Josephine considered the question carefully. I thought it was. Teaching has always been my calling, but now. But now, Preston prompted when she trailed off. Now I'm not sure if it's San Francisco I want or if it's just the teaching, she admitted. This place, this life, it's changed me, Preston. He turned to look at her then, hope kindling in his eyes. Cheyenne has a school. They're always looking for qualified teachers. The implication was clear, and Josephine felt a surge of warmth at what he was suggesting. Are you saying I could have both, teaching and this? She gestured at the ranch surrounding them. If that's what you want, Preston said cautiously. It would mean a long ride into town each day, but we could make it work. We? Josephine asked softly. Preston took a deep breath, then reached for her hand. Josephine, I know it hasn't been long and there's still so much uncertainty ahead of us. But I've never been more certain of my feelings for anyone than I am for you. Tears pricked at her eyes, but they were tears of joy. Preston, a shot rang out, splintering the porch railing inches from where they sat. Preston reacted instantly, pushing Josephine down and covering her body with his own as more gunfire erupted from the darkness. Stay down, he ordered, drawing his revolver. Charlie, he shouted toward the bunkhouse. We're under attack. The ranch exploded into activity as the hands grabbed their weapons and took up defensive positions. Preston kept Josephine protected behind the solid porch wall as bullets whizzed overhead. Is it Blackwood's men? She asked, her heart pounding. Preston's expression was grim. Or Webb. Either way, they picked the wrong ranch to attack. The firefight continued for several tense minutes, with shots coming from the tree line at the edge of the property. Finally, Charlie's voice called out, "They're running, boss." Preston waited a moment longer, then cautiously peered over the railing. Looks like they're gone, but they might circle back. Charlie set up a perimeter. Teddy, check the outbuildings. Everyone else, stay alert. As the men moved to follow his orders, Preston helped Josephine to her feet. Are you all right? She nodded, though her hands were shaking. Who do you think it was? We'll know soon enough, Preston replied, his jaw set in determined lines. Whoever it was just made their last mistake. True to his word, they discovered the identity of their attackers the following day when a group of riders approached the ranch openly, led by none other than James Blackwood himself. Preston, Josephine, and all the hands were waiting, armed and ready. That's far enough, Blackwood, Preston called as the group reached the edge of the yard. State your business and then get off my land. Blackwood, a corpulent man with a florid face and expensive clothes, sneered down from his horse. I've come to make you one final offer, Macintyre. Sell to me now, or next time we won't just be firing warning shots. So you admit to the attack last night, Preston said evenly, though Josephine could feel the tension radiating from him. Consider it a demonstration of what's to come, Blackwood replied with a dismissive wave. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Be sensible. Preston's laugh was cold. You might want to count again, Blackwood. As if on cue, riders appeared on the ridge behind the ranch house, a dozen men in blue uniforms, led by a man with a silver star on his chest. What's this? Blackwood demanded, his confidence faltering. That would be the U.S. Marshal and his deputies, Preston explained with satisfaction. Seems the territorial governor takes a dim view of land grabbing and attempted murder. Blackwood's face paled. You're bluffing. The local sheriff has been suspended pending an investigation into corruption, the marshal announced, riding down to join them. James Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, attempted murder, and cattle rustling. As Blackwood and his men were disarmed and taken into custody, the marshal approached Preston and Josephine. Mr. Macintyre, Miss Daniels, I'm Marshal Hayes. We received your documentation and witness statements. Fine work. Thank you, Marshal, Preston replied, shaking the man's hand. But we've got another problem. A man named Johnny Webb is also in custody, Hayes informed them with a smile. Caught him trying to sneak into town this morning. Apparently, he'd been watching the ranch, waiting for an opportunity to get to Miss Daniels. Relief washed over Josephine in a dizzying wave. So it's over, both threats. It appears so, Hayes confirmed. Though you'll both still need to testify at the trials. After the marshal and his prisoners departed, a celebration broke out at the Rockingham. Charlie broke out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion, and Rosa prepared a feast that had everyone groaning with satisfaction. Music, laughter, and a sense of hard-won peace filled the ranch house. Late in the evening, Preston found Josephine sitting on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. "May I join you?" he asked. She smiled and moved over to make room for him. "It's your swing." "It's your home too," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "If you want it to be." Josephine's heart skipped a beat. "Preston, before we were interrupted last night, you were saying something about your feelings." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I was saying that I love you, Josephine Daniels. That from the moment I carried you away from that auction platform, something in me recognized something in you. I don't have fancy words or poetic phrases. I just have the truth, plain and simple." Tears filled Josephine's eyes, but she blinked them away, wanting to see his face clearly. "I love you too, Preston Macintyre. I think I have since that night in the line shack when you held me through the storm." Preston's smile was like coming home after a long journey. "I was thinking about that too. About how perfect you felt in my arms, and how much I've wanted to hold you again every night since." "What's stopping you now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Preston's answer was to pull her gently into his embrace, one hand cradling the back of her head as his lips found hers in a kiss that started tender and quickly deepened with the force of feelings too long restrained. Josephine melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as she returned his kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife, my partner, my heart." "Yes," Josephine replied without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They were married in Cheyenne on a crisp September day, with Charlie giving Josephine away and the entire ranch in attendance. The territorial governor himself performed the ceremony, a gesture of appreciation for their role in bringing Blackwood to justice. Josephine wore a gown of ivory silk that Preston had ordered from Denver, and he cut a handsome figure in a new black suit. But what everyone remembered most was the look that passed between them as they spoke their vows, a look of such profound love and commitment that even the most hardened cowboys found themselves wiping away tears. After the ceremony, as they danced under the stars in the courtyard of Cheyenne's finest hotel, Preston pulled his bride close and whispered, "Happy?" Josephine smiled up at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Happier than I ever thought possible, even without San Francisco." He teased gently. "Especially without San Francisco," she assured him. "Though I am looking forward to starting at the Cheyenne school next month." Preston twirled her in a graceful circle. "The children of Cheyenne don't know how lucky they are about to be." "Neither did I," Josephine replied softly. "When I woke up on that auction platform with no memory of how I got there, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." "Providence," Preston reminded her, echoing his words from early in their journey. "Some things are meant to be." Their honeymoon was spent at the Rockingham, in the master bedroom that was now theirs to share. Preston had added feminine touches: new curtains, a larger mirror, a cushioned chair by the window where Josephine could read or sew. But the most meaningful addition was the photograph on the bedside table, a wedding portrait of the two of them, looking into each other's eyes with undisguised love. Life settled into a new rhythm. Josephine rode into Cheyenne 3 days a week to teach at the school, while continuing to manage the ranch's books and correspondence. Preston expanded their cattle operation, using his business acumen and Josephine's organizational skills to turn the Rocking M into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Their first child, a son they named Michael after Preston's father, was born the following summer. 2 years later, they welcomed twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine. The house that had once seemed too large for a solitary cowboy now rang with children's laughter and the warmth of family life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Josephine with a special gift, the deed to a small plot of land adjacent to the school in Cheyenne. "What's this for?" she asked, puzzled. Preston grinned, pleased with her surprise. "I thought you might like to build a proper library for the town, something your parents would have been proud of." Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes as she threw her arms around her husband's neck. "Oh, Preston, it's perfect." The Macintyre Memorial Library opened its doors a year later, with Josephine serving as its first librarian on the days she wasn't teaching. It quickly became a gathering place for the community, offering knowledge and opportunity to people from all walks of life. As for Johnny Webb, he and his associates received lengthy prison sentences for their crimes. Blackwood, too, faced justice, though his money bought him a more comfortable cell than most. The Rocking M never again faced threats from rustlers or land grabbers. Preston's reputation as a fair but formidable rancher spread throughout the territory, earning him respect from neighbors and competitors alike. On a golden evening in the autumn of 1883, 10 years after Preston had carried Josephine to safety, they sat together on their porch swing watching their children play in the yard. Michael, now 9, was teaching his 7-year-old sisters how to throw a lasso, with limited success but unlimited enthusiasm. "You ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't been in Truckee that day?" Josephine asked, her head resting on Preston's shoulder. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at all this," he gestured to their home, their children, their life together, "and I know there was no other path for us. We were always meant to find each other, even in the darkest of circumstances." Josephine smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from an unconscious woman on an auction block to the mistress of a thriving ranch, a respected teacher, a beloved wife and mother. "I used to dream of adventure when I was a girl," she mused. "Of discovering new places and living a life outside the ordinary." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple. "And did you find it? That adventure you were looking for?" Josephine turned in his arms, looking into the face of the man who had saved her in more ways than one. The years had added a few lines around his eyes, a touch of silver at his temples, but his gaze still held the same strength and tenderness that had captured her heart. "I found something better," she said softly. "I found love, I found home." As the sun set over the Rocking M, casting long shadows across the land they had nurtured together, Preston and Josephine Macintyre shared a kiss that held the promise of all their yesterdays and all their tomorrows, a love forged in danger, tempered by challenges, and strengthened by the life they had built side by side in the wild heart of Wyoming.